Hello and welcome to Jump. Sorry, not to Jump. Yes, to Jump. I was going to say Jump Eddie Van Halen then, but these tributes to Eddie Van Halen, because I've been given so much stick over the last couple of weeks by Mr. Sharp about not playing Eddie Van Halen, and unfortunately passed away yesterday. So there was Mr. Van Halen for you all. So welcome to Jump. Start your team. Start your team performance. Who's calling the shots in your team? Is it you? I think when we start to look around organisations and we start to look at the chances that we've all had and given people that we've been managing, it all comes down to negative behaviour when we start to look at people who start to upset our team. And it's what chances do you give the people that have negative behaviour within your business? So start to look at the research on this to sort of look at how teams really help. And Gallup came up with some really great research. And we want to sort of build on this, that 51% of all employees are not fully engaged, which is quite a shock. But when you start to look at your business, I can really sort of understand that. It also said that 17% of your employees are actively disengaged and causing trouble, i.e. they're causing bad vibe in the office, they're bad mouthing about the business, etc., etc. And then there's 32% of employees are actually engaged. So the real problem is, what do those 17% actually do to your business? And what do the 51%, how do you get that 51% moving more towards the really engaged employees and further away from the disengaged employees? Because one of the actual things that the Institute of People Performance came out with, that people that are engaged are twice as productive as they are when they're not engaged. They stay 5 times longer than they do when they're not engaged. And they take 10 times less sick leave. So it sort of brings a real big question about engaging your employees and what we should be doing with that. So this week, that's what we're looking at. Again, we're going to be quite controversial. It's going to be quite punchy. Feel free to ask questions if you want to ask questions. So looking at the first question, guys, have you analysed your employees to establish which group your employees fall into, whether engaged, disengaged, or partly engaged? And what do you actually measure to get the truth? Mr. Sharp, as you throw me in the deep end this weekend with Eddie Van Halen, I'm going to throw you straight into the deep end. How would you sort of answer that?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's, one of the things that disengages a lot of people is not being listened to, Howard, and it's taken 3 attempts for me to request Van Halen. I haven't felt listened to in the other 2. But we got there eventually, so thank you. I now feel a little bit more engaged and motivated than what I did than week 1. It's a really great question. I think, first and foremost, I think it's about trying to work out in your workforce who is highly engaged, who is engaged, who is either neither engaged or disengaged, or somebody that floats between the 2. Who are your disengaged employees and who are your highly disengaged employees? And I think, what I would be doing and what I have done in the past is map people on that axis to try and understand where people are at. You can then get your managers to also map people as well and do the same thing and compare the results. And you can also ask your own employees to map themselves if you've got the right culture and environment and they're going to be honest, and map themselves against that axis. So I think the starting point has got to be about understanding where people are. The second point I just make is, I think there's a real massive difference between difficult and different employees to toxic employees. And I think sometimes as leaders, we because people don't see the world that through our eyes in the way that we see it, we can sometimes think they are, disengaged. Sometimes it's just that they see the world through a different set of eyes, and therefore they're different. But having that balance in your organisation is actually a healthy thing for me. It's not unhealthy. So making sure you're very clear in terms of whether people are toxic or whether they're just different to you as an individual. And then I think, moving on from that, it's about, understanding how people are behaving, why they're disengaged, and whether they're aware of, the values, whether they're aware of what you were trying to achieve in the business, If you've got a set of values, do you promote them? Do you measure them? And I think I've said before, you know, what you measure as a business leader speaks volumes about what's important to you deep down. So when you are, you know, talking to people about promotion criteria or whether they've underperformed or overperformed, the results is really important, but are you also talking about the way they behave and if that's aligned to the values? And I think Paul come on to a second in terms of, you know, exiting people, you know, from the business, if it comes to that. I think the first thing for me is, you know, when you're doing your quarterly reviews, when you're doing your 6-monthly reviews, you've got to be talking about the values. And, you know, as in terms of justification of not promoting somebody or exiting them out of the business, if you've promoted your values and you've made it really clear how people should behave in, then people will probably be aware of the consequences. And that's part of how you de-risk losing somebody from the business, particularly a high performer who may not be displaying the right behaviours. It's all about making sure that everybody understands what's expected of them and the consequences if they don't.
It's really interesting when you sort of look at that, Paul, how that sort of works out. And I know sort of through my own experience, you know, dealing with these people is quite time consuming and very, very draining from a management point of view, but it's how you deal with them. And it's about, as you said, your purpose and about your vision, your values and living up to those. Yeah. Paul Jacobs, know that you were interested on this question when we started to put this questionnaire together, that you wanted to come on to that. So I'm very interested in your comments on this one.
Thanks, Howard. Morning, everybody. Okay, let's just look at the actual title of this session. We're talking about inspiring and managing your team and specific individuals in your team, or the question, are you a hostage to fear of change? And I think let's just take a quick look at that situation. I think Paul's made some absolutely brilliant points, and I think the most important thing is to truly understand as a leader what your values are. What is it all about in your business? Is it about the chase of money at all costs, or do you prize great customer, client, candidate service above everything, knowing that when you provide world-class service, the money follows? And I think you have to have a very, very clear understanding of what your own values are. People follow people who share their values, share their belief system. And if you are clear about that, very clear, and you constantly, if you like, chant that mantra every single day, it'll become fairly clear, I think, to you who shares those values, who shares those beliefs, your mission, your vision. I mean, Paul made the point, and I think it's a very valid one. You need one-on-ones with people, but I think you do need to group people. And I think let's just expand that very quickly. So in my mind, I think you've almost got 3 groups of people in a sense that are in your business. They're the people that completely get what you're all about. They absolutely inherently understand what's driving the business, where the business is going, the values, the belief system that hopefully surges through your organization. They get it. You feel very close to those people. You'll know who they are. Then there's a kind of middle group, if you like. They're people, I think Paul made a kind of reference to them, that are on side, but they may be thinking slightly differently. And in particular, if they've just returned from furlough, they're just getting back into the whole work thing again. You need to just get close to them and understand where their heads are at. Because I think that if they're slightly disengaged, it doesn't mean they are totally disengaged. You can bring them with you on the journey. And then the third group are the people that we last week referred to as the terrorists. They're the people that truly aren't aligned with the values and behaviors of your organization, or in particular your leadership values and behaviors. And they're the ones that, and you guys know this, they can often be the people that are your largest billers. That's the irony always, it seems to me, that very, very often the terrorist is the person that generates most money. And here's the problem, I think, for lots of people at the moment, particularly now, because it's tough out there. Trying to make money is not easy. No one's ever said differently at this point in time. And having the courage to challenge somebody in your business or people in your business who are not sharing your values, not sharing your behaviors, and running the risk that they may actually leave you is a tough call. It's a very tough call. Having said that, if you're looking at it from a medium to long-term perspective, having somebody in your business that is not aligned with your values, that is basically burning bridges with clients, burning bridges with candidates, upsetting people around them to the extent that, and you've seen it yourselves, people won't work with them, is going to do your business enormous harm going forward. At some point, you have to deal with this situation. So look, I think picking up on Paul's point, we're not going to use this next 45 minutes to talk about how you get rid of people. That's a very negative attitude. We don't want that. Nobody wants that. We want to get people on side. But there is this point that if you are failing to do that, then you have to make a tough call. And some of those tough calls are going to need to be taken now. And in my mind, it's a very simple point. What is the business about? What are your values? What would you like to be seen as? What's the legacy for you as a leader and for your business? And if you are very clear about that and you constantly chant that mantra, then I think making a decision about the people around you is, although painful, is actually relatively simple. And it's one I think you have to face up to fairly fast. Last point from me, if you do have somebody that is a big biller, but is definitely somebody that you do not see a great future for in your business, you need to be succession planning. Who's going to step up and take this person's place? Have you got people that need to be developed in your organization that could replace that individual? Or is it the case that you need to get on the recruitment trail right now, even in this market, and look to get people in who are going to put you in a position where you have a safety net so that losing that person isn't necessarily going to cause you too much harm and damage?
So it's interesting when you sort of look at that, Paul, about that succession planning, management development. I think the first thing we've got to sort of talk about is how do you know the impact that a bad apple has or the terrorist has on your business, and what does that look like? I know, David, me and you have been talking to numerous clients over the last couple of weeks about this type of situation. So I'm interested in what you've been seeing from a practical point of view, Dave, about how the impact of certain people have on the business and what it looks like.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because we talk a lot about purpose. We talk a lot about engagement. We want engaged people. And some of these people that we could term bad apples, in some way they seem engaged, but really, of course, they're not, because they're after their own, they have their own motivations for what they're doing. I can talk about a practical example of a guy I hired years ago. We'll call him Bob. I was on the borderline of whether I wanted to take him on or not. And I asked him to tell me one thing that would really make a difference in the interview process. What could he do? And he said, actually, Dave, I could kill you with my thumb. Turned out he was he'd been in the army, and I just thought, oh, there's a spark about that person. I really like that. Yeah. Took him on, and to be honest, he was quite good. But that energy and that self-motivation, he just wasn't much of a team player. And it got worse, because he then started misrepresenting our company with our clients. And our clients were then beginning to phone me up and saying, it's a bit of a loose cannon, this one. And although, to Paul's point earlier, we were selling and placing more contractors, and a lot of the people thought he was great because they were only engaged with him for a few hours a week, or maybe they saw him once a month for lunch or something like that. His colleagues back in the office were kind of looking at us as a management team, thinking, how much longer are you going to put up with this? Even though he's a performer, it isn't working. So it was having an impact on our business. The clients were beginning to say, I'm not sure I want to deal with an organization that hires that type of person. And a lot of it actually is down to your own organization, whether you've got 4 or 40. It's about organizational development, how you are structured. Because having one toxic or bad apple, yeah, is much worse than having 2 or 3 overachievers, because it's the bad ones that are damaging your brand with your clients and are damaging what's going on among, on the sales floor or with the management team. So it is something that needs to be addressed, because you are going to find that your clients will suffer, and ultimately your performance will suffer. And then we're in a situation now where reputation is absolutely valuable. As we scale, as we grow from the situation we find ourselves with COVID and all that's going on, we want to be seen as good recruiters. We want to be having a good reputation. And there is that old phrase, isn't it? You're as strong as your weakest link. Well, weak doesn't mean performance. Weak can mean purpose. Weak can mean motivation. And that's really important. You've got to get that bit right.
I think I'm going to say I think it's really interesting that when we sort of look at that, because I always think that, you know, looking at the behaviour of people is really important. And when you start to study the behaviour of people and how people react, you start to see the effect that it has. Do people realise that a negative effect has 5 times more weight than a positive comment? So if anyone's making negative comments, it takes 5 positive comments to reverse that negative effect. So if you've got a person constantly chipping away at your team and constantly chipping away at your values and your beliefs, then what they're doing is they're bringing the whole business down, and it takes an awful lot to change that round and move that round. So we've got to start to think, if people are starting to give that negative effect all the time, and I always think you've got positive deviance in your business and you've got negative deviance in your business. It's that negative deviant, if they start to really drag everybody else down, that's when you've got to start to sort this out. And we always talk about how to make the boat go faster, and if you've got all your business in the boat, well, what you find is that most people are sat down in the boat rowing. Yes, they might not be pulling in the same direction or pulling at the same speed as other people, but they're all generally trying to row in the direction. What you find with your negative deviant, they're stood up in the middle of the boat and they're rocking from side to side, and what that means is that one side can't get the oar in the water and the other side is dragging too much water, so traction starts to lose really, really quickly. And therefore, as a manager, you have a decision to make. How do you make that person sit down and comply, or do you just remove that person from the boat and make the boat go faster? So we've got to start to think about the effects that these people have, because it deteriorates team trust. It deteriorates that group sense of capability, of that positive culture, and it gets a physical and psychological disengagement from your team that you can't really afford. And when you start to think about the psychological engagement of your team as we start to come out of lockdown, if everyone's in the same boat and pulling in the same direction as much as humanly possible, then we've got to really start to think we're in a really good position. But if we're in a boat that's rocking all over the place, then there's a big chance that you may capsize, and that person may capsize the boat and not just take other people down with you, but take the business down with you. So it's a really sort of interesting view when you look at it in that real big sense. And I just think, how do you identify people and what do you know about the people is, if you find yourself in management meetings spending 15, 20 minutes talking about one person, then that one person is obviously something that they're doing radically wrong or doing brilliantly right. And you've got to start to think about how you address that, because that's a lot of time wasted where you could be looking at what the actual core basics of the business is and what your fundamental strategy needs to be, rather than actually talking about this person that's taking you away from the direction of your business. So I think it's interesting, I say, when I used to challenge these people, you used to get a very different result. Those that were engaged, when you challenged them on something, they'd come back with genuine answers. They'd come back with other ideas. They'd come back with positivity. Those that are genuinely not engaged would come back with excuses, reasons why things aren't happening, problems. They create problems and sort problems. So when you start to identify them, there's easy mechanisms to identify them, because they're the ones that will always make excuses for everything that's going on around them, and they won't ever look at themselves. So it's an important thing to sort of view, the impact of that bad apple is huge. So the question then asks, and I think you alluded to this to Paul when we started to talk about this, do you know the difference between a person who is a negative influence and a person who is sometimes challenging, but they're an actually positive person within the business? And sometimes these people get mixed up very, very quickly inside there. So Paul, we've worked with big organizations and big offices where you have people who are genuinely challenging to you, and you have people who are genuinely negatively, and that's a real challenge. How do you differentiate the two?
Okay, I'd just have to say, interesting analogies. So we go from boats and apples. I don't know if you put apples in boats. I don't know what you get then. It's interesting mixed metaphors. There's some interesting points that have been brought up here, and I think you make a very good explanation, Howard, in terms of people not pulling in the same direction. And I think, it's something that needs to be analysed. One of the things I didn't say when I last spoke was that I think a method of finding out just exactly what influence people are having within your business as leaders, as managers, is to talk to your clients. Find out how they feel about the quality of the service they receive from your people. We've often talked about the circle of influence, Howard, haven't we? Where we talk about what impact you have on others around you, that circle, and you have a number of areas where you can touch, as it were, people within your organization. So you have an opportunity to influence the people within your business. The people in your business, your consultants, are obviously having an impact on candidates and clients. And I think the third area for you as a leader is to get close to the clients. Now, one of the things we talked about a moment ago is the fear that people have if somebody leaves their organization and the impact of that loss to the organization. I can assure you there's far less of a worry if you are at least as close to your clients as your consultants are. And if you own that, if you own your business, you should be the number one name on the minds of the organizations that you deal with. You should always be their major point of contact. And it's really important as managers, as owners, as leaders, that you have an outstanding relationship with the bulk of the clients that work with your business. So if somebody leaves, they're not going to take that, if you like, that intellectual property with them, that relationship with them. You have to protect yourself. That's not to say that you expect people to leave, but inevitably people leave your business. Make sure you're constantly keeping in touch, and you will find out when you speak to your clients precisely what they think of the people working for you. And let's accentuate the positives here. Let's hope that when you speak with them, they tell you how great the people are that they work with, rather than the negatives. But if there are negatives, this is a clear way of you finding out. And by the way, yes, as Paul would say, send out questionnaires and surveys, but there is no substitute, frankly, for picking up a phone or using this type of medium, or indeed getting in front of clients and indeed speaking to candidates when you get the opportunity. Look outside. We often talk about spending 70% of your time as leaders and managers looking outside of your business, being active outside of your four walls. This is a clear instance where this is very important. And back to the point you've made, Howard, I think, how do you know the difference between people that are on side or simply thinking differently? And I think there are a number of different types of people working within every organization. We have people that are very creative, if you call them ideas people. They may well have better ideas than yours. I always think it's a brilliant way to get fabulous ideas out of your business by involving people in your company. Understand their viewpoints. Very often the absolute best ideas come from the people in your company, not yours. And some of the best ideas I had at Office Angels, particularly things like that chocolate angel we were famous for giving out, came from one of our receptionists. I think she was based in Birmingham, who'd been staring at the Christmas tree and suggested that maybe we should give out those lovely chocolate angels you see on Christmas trees to clients. We did that for about 15 years. So I think some of the best ideas come from people around you. Thinking differently is not thinking badly. Let's get their ideas on board. You have people that are very analytical. They want all the detail. They want to look at the facts, the figures. They want to understand where is feeling coming from. They're not necessarily empathetic, high EQ people. They want to look at the actual numbers. They're great people. They're the people, again, that you want to get involved. And then you'll have people that will take a great idea and make it a better idea, a great process, a great practice, and they'll polish that idea and that practice, and they will eventually get it to a better place. And so everybody in your organization needs to be consulted with. Just because they don't think exactly like you doesn't mean that's a bad thing. In fact, I'd say it's extremely positive. You need people working as a team, developing ideas. So if they're not necessarily thinking in the same way you are presently, that doesn't make them a terrorist. It actually makes them a great ally. And what you need to understand is how their ideas, their thought processes can help you to develop a good idea into a brilliant one. And that's why this constant heightened state of communication that you need to provoke and develop in your organization is essential, one-on-one and in groups, constantly, every day. And just back to my first point, please be very close to your clients and candidates at this stage, and indeed forever, because that's how you're going to understand whether you're providing world-class service or service that is disappointing people.
I think it's interesting that I'm working with a couple of clients at the moment, Paul, that have got this very situation going on. And the way you describe people, whether you're a driver or a red person, there's lots of different ways that these people are described. I think the big thing that links them all together, they must be team players and in it for the business. And it's interesting when you have this sort of situation where you have that team environment and you start to push ideas out there. That person that is that analytical type person will challenge some of those ideas, so they want to understand. And what to me, that is a cry for information. They're crying for more information to understand it, so that they can then go sell it. What I find those that are very negative about the business, what they tend to do is they tend to shy away for that type of meeting. They tend to sort of hide in the shadows and agree with what people say and then backstab behind that, rather than actually bring it out in front and be challenged in front, because they're scared. They're the archetypal bully. They're scared to be challenged, and they know that if you challenge them, that's what will happen. So these people tend to sometimes are out very visual, but sometimes hide very much in the shadows. So the difference is those people that are genuinely engaged but are looking for more confirmation of what the idea is, that is to me is a real positive thing. And from those, as you said, sometimes an idea can start to grow and then blossom and then bloom. But other times what you have is that person that ignores that and then takes it away, and then behind that is slowly adding a little bit of poison to the water to stop your idea blossoming and blooming. So we've got to start to think that when you know the difference of those type of people, you've got to start to think of how you react to each individual person within your business and start to develop those people in your business. And I think it's important that you do recognize those people and take immediate action on what we do. Now, the big question, and we said we want to earn on a real positive note. So as we've sort of just approaching sort of just over halfway of this meeting, the big question that I want to ask is, how do we develop the 51% of the employees who are not engaged and turn them into engaged employees? Remember, if you could take that 51% of your business and then turn those into a bigger percentage of engaged employees, how much more your business would move forward, and how quickly it would move forward, and how it would squash the negativity from within your business. So it's a very big question to ask. So I'm going to go back to Dave first and say, Dave, again, you've worked with lots of multi-office businesses where culture is hard to spread right across those type of offices, but where you have lots of people who are engaged and lots of people who are potentially disengaged. How did you turn those people into engaged and motivated units to push your business forward?
I think there's two sides to it, H. One of them is the big one that we always talk about, and that goes back to purpose. What is as a leader, what is your purpose for your organization? As a business, what is the purpose of your business? And constantly reminding and encouraging your staff that this is why we do what we do. This is the journey that we're going on, and this is your part in it. I can't stress how much that you can over communicate that as much as you like, and you're going to win. It's one of the few things you can keep doing, reminding people of their value, reminding people of the purpose of the organization and where they fit in it. Because if you do get one of those that is, use that phrase, the bad apple, then you can address why they're behaving that way. Ask them, what's working well in our company? We could talk about employee surveys. Well, these are the things I would want to know from my employees. What's working well? Where do you feel you can contribute? Where would you like to contribute? The more that you engage with everyone, the more that you engage with those who are feeling maybe a little bit left out, maybe they're the ones that aren't hitting their performance target, but their attitude is right. Their love for the business is right. Their belief in the purpose of the business is right. So they just need a little bit more time. And I'd also add in another question, and it's one for you as a leader to weigh up and think about. When we talk about bad people and toxic people and bad apples, just in the back of your mind, ask yourself the question, what if they're right? What if they're right and everybody else is wrong? Yeah. Now, it's rare that will be the case, but it could be that they're trying to alert you to something in your organization that isn't right, but you're not hearing it because you're just thinking, actually, they're a bad apple. To take on a pun, a bad apple does make a business crumble. So how can you make that person get them on board. That's what you want to do. Change is now the thing that just goes on with our business all the way along. Everything's changing all the time. That's just the way things are normally. So how can you get alongside people who don't like change? You know what? If they don't like change, they may have a bit of a problem with the way the world is going, or they may be in a role that isn't going to require much change, and that's okay for them. All you can do is keep asking them, keep encouraging them, keep showing them that you believe in them. Ask them to generate some ideas if they can, or help them to implement some ideas if they can. And keep praising, keep encouraging, keep rewarding, and try to sift out those that are causing the problem in the first place.
I think there's a question there, Dave, that needs answering to sort of put custard on your crumble, is to sort of really look at the behaviour of people and look at what you're doing as a manager. And I think as a manager's job, that winning the hearts and minds of people, we talk about divide and conquer. There's some chat on the moment, chat on the chat bar at the moment about divide and conquer. You know, divide and conquer is one thing, but what we start to think about is the hearts and minds of the people. So if you as a manager are getting into the hearts and minds of the right people, then you will divide and conquer and create a separation from those people. But when we talk about rewarding, and we talk about rewarding people, generally what most people reward on is performance and what performance is, where really what you should also be thinking about is rewarding behavior and what type of behavior you want to be exemplified within the business. And a lot of that is then listening as a manager to what's going on and listening what's happening. Now, it's interesting, when I was a manager and I was speaking to a client the other day about this, and they were saying, I have a couple of people talking to me about one of the people within the business. They're complaining about this person because they're bringing them down. Now, to me as a manager, that's two people that are hearts and minds within the business on my side and coming and telling me about a problem. My job is now to go away and address that problem and how I address that problem. And sometimes, depending on the level of toxicity this person is spreading, it depends on the level of how disengaged they are. And I think once you get within that 17%, the chance of changing them round is very hard. But those people that can change, it's about listening to what you said there, Dave, and listen to what they have to say, because they might be talking something that's absolutely on point, and then reacting to that and doing something about that and bringing them into the fold and bringing them under your wing so you can actually listen to what you're saying. You get closer to them and talk to them, and that's about them developing them. So it's not just about training and developing on recruitment skills, it's about training and developing them on their behavioral and what that ripple effect of their behavior has, because they might not understand that what their behavior is doing is having a huge effect on other people. And sometimes once they realize that, then their behavior starts to change and they become a little bit more in line. Those that are genuine true terrorists, that behavior will never change. So you've got to think that those people that you can start to convert and look at them and work really hard on converting them, and that is praising them, that is genuinely understanding what motivates them. And I think a big thing about management is about understanding what genuinely motivates your staff. And I've had this conversation again this week and last week, that if you think that it's money that motivates your staff, then you're sorely mistaken, because even in good times, if it was money, then that would mean all your salespeople would be above target and highly motivated. They're genuinely not. But if you genuinely find out as a manager what truly motivates your people, then what you can start to do is you can start to engage on their or in their motivation and drive their motivation forward. And once you start to drive their motivation forward, you start to get far more engagement from your staff and far more loyalty from your staff. And to me, that's then about looking at what is their security. And sometimes it's just about getting their, they may be insecure about certain things within the business, and then it's about reconfirming that security for them. It might be their request for knowledge. It's about driving that knowledge from them. And some people are, and we've discussed this in the past, some people are genuinely happy in their job, but obviously as the market moves forward and forward, their job potentially may change, and they are fearful of that. And that might put a little negative vibe, but it's how you deal with that change and how you deal with that. However, change is really important. the business should always be changing. So driving that through is really important as well. And seeing those people who are anti-change will either, again, start to identify the people who you want in your business and who you don't want in your business. So I think developing that 51% is really important, and it's about getting into their hearts and minds and motivating them. So as we move sort of forward, as a manager, how do you get those who are engaged to help you on your mission to deliver your company value? Remember, 30% of the people are always engaged. And Paul, you talked about the circle of influence there that you have. Okay, so let's talk about from a management point of view. We've talked very much about from a person point of view. Let's talk about from a management point of view, how you get your engaged people to help drive further engagement down the business and deliver your values and mission.
So I just want to pick up on your final point there, Howard. Excuse me. Security. I mean, it's a word that we should just linger on for a second. A lot of people, I mean, an awful lot of people, for absolutely, completely understandable reasons, are feeling deeply insecure at the moment. And that's hardly a great surprise given the current circumstances we all find ourselves in. Now, I think as leaders, as managers, you've got to work very hard to make sure that your people are feeling secure. Now, how do you do that at a time when we're going through a global pandemic, a global crisis? You know, you cannot give a cast iron guarantee to anybody that the business will always be in good condition, will always be solvent, that their jobs will always be safe. Nobody can make that cast iron 100% guarantee. It's simply not possible. But I do think that as leaders, we can make sure, to your point, Howard, that you bring people on side, that they share, they understand totally what needs to be done in the business, to your point that change has to be made, that's an imperative. We've talked endlessly over the last 5-6 months about how change is an imperative now, that you have to change. It's only the crisis, in a sense, that's accentuated that point. It's always been the case that you have to evolve and change, not only as a business, but as human beings, as individuals. If you stand still, you pull up the handbrake, people go past you. What we're now saying is that you have to change at a much more rapid rate as a business and as individuals than you've had to in the past. The fact is that what worked in the past is not working now to the same degree that it worked 12 months ago. And in 6 months' time, what we're doing today will not be working as effectively as it does today. So getting people on side, getting people motivated, understanding what's making them tick, to your point, Howard, is an absolutely relevant, extremely relevant point. And this issue of making people feel as secure as they can feel during these difficult times is a challenge for all leaders. But it's absolutely critical that you make them feel loved, you make them feel valued, that they understand the challenges for the business. Not necessarily sharing balance sheets or profit and loss sheets or cash flow forecasts with them. That's not always something that you need to do, but certainly making them very aware of what has to be done to keep the business moving forward and to take advantages of the opportunities that are out there. Because lots of the companies, Howard, that we four are working with are actually growing quite rapidly at the moment, even during these difficult times. There's a brilliant opportunity to build market share right now, despite the circumstances we find ourselves in. So I think it's understanding, back to your point, Howard, the things that motivate people. Look at your circle of influence. Who are you closest to? Who do you need to get closer to within your organization? And I mentioned it before, and I'm going to repeat it. You know, the basic premise for any good quality business is to thrill clients, not just please them, thrill them. Not just give them what they pay for, but give them much more than what they pay for. And how do you know whether you're succeeding? You need to be speaking to them. And I'm going to keep coming back to that point. Keep close to your clients, especially your existing clients. Make sure they're happy, thrilled with the service, and keep circling back to the people within your company. Heighten your communication with them.
So I think there's a comment there, and just to jump in there, Paul, is as a manager, I always thought that I had two clients. I had my clients that were buying from me, and I had my consultants that were my clients. And so my job was to also please them, but not please them constantly by pandering to them, but by making sure morale was high. And if I knew morale was high, then I knew that productivity was high. If I knew productivity was high, then I knew that profitability would be high. And what I did was I found those employees who were genuinely engaged and worked with them. As a manager, what I used to fear was if we change a commission plan or change something, there would be two thoughts in my head. Who's going to challenge this in a positive way, and who's going to challenge this in a negative way? Those that would challenge in a positive way, I'd love the argument and love the conversation with them, and I love how that worked. Those that were negative, then I had to deal with that properly. If I feared that and shied away from that, I knew that morale would drop, because I knew that person would spread more negativity through the business. And at certain stages, I removed those. So as a manager, I always worked on myself about how do I put this across to people to get them to understand. And so it was all about communication and driving that from a communication point of view. Paul,
One of the point, Howard, for me is just about, I think one of the areas where we sometimes get this wrong, and we've touched on it a little bit, is we see the world differently. And what I think managers don't do enough of is checking in with their people. And you made a point about, finding out, what motivates people. There is a difference between thinking you know what motivates people and actually knowing what motivates people. And I think that finding out what is absolutely motivating people is really important. And I come back to a second point, which just is, whenever you're having conversations about behavior, performance, attitude, the more you make that conversation objective, because it's based around data or measurement, the less emotion there is attached to it. And the more other people, can empathise, because it's based around objective data. And the last point I'd just make, and I keep saying this, and I think I must have said this loads over the last 6 months. For me, it's about the triangle of trust. And the three corners are logic and data, empathy and authenticity. And on some of the posts that I've put out on LinkedIn, some of my old team have made, one or two comments about, Sharpie is, infamous triangle and all the rest of it. And you know why? Because I consistently talked about the importance of making conversations based around data and logic, being authentic, and really heightening skills around empathy. And that empathy, we've talked a little bit about, backbiting, conversations going on, and then, changing, when somebody leaves the room, or a week later, or having a little huddle with somebody else. That is the bit I'd be homing in on. Because if you are absolutely listening and you're engaged, and you've created an environment whereby people feel that they can converse, then that you'll have no problems. Or you'll quickly realise that the person that you're speaking to, won't be up for shifting. They don't want to vocalise for whatever reason, and it's probably about time to go. But that trust bit, engaging people, it's always worked for me really well. Stick to conversations about data. Be very, very true to yourself. Consistently be very true, and make sure you are really, really working on the empathy part.
Dave?
Yeah, I say it's interesting, isn't it? When we talk about Van Halen, there's a brilliant line in that song, Jump. You've got to roll with the punches and get to what's real. And what's real is trust. What's real is purpose. What's real is your vision. What's real is going on in the lives of your people. If you as a leader can get to that, you're going to discover who are the ones that are going to take you forward, and perhaps who are the ones that are not.
So it's very interesting. So as we sort of move on to the end of this webinar, when we talk about next week's webinar. So next week we've got Phil Davis in, who's a ex-Welsh rugby international. He's an international coach. He coached international teams to the last Rugby World Cup. And his take and his view on building teams is really, really interesting. and he will talk about some of the things we've talked about over the last 3 weeks and talk about how he put those into a team to make sure that they performed. And some of that was addressing some of the problems that we've talked about here about the terrorists within the business. He'll talk about that with him from a sporting point of view, but he'll also talk about vision, he'll talk about ethos, and he'll talk about lots of things that I think are very relevant in a sporting environment coming from an ex-professional sporting background, but also for within a team environment from a sales point of view and how you get your team to move forward. And it's interesting that it's not always the team of superstars that actually wins. It's generally a team that's more cohesive and built together and trust each other that generally wins. And there you'll then create the stars from that. So next week, I think is going to be a really interesting conversation. Phil is, I was speaking to him this week as we were sort of looking at the presentation that he's sent to me. He's genuinely really revved up for what's going on. He's very charismatic. He's a big man, and he's got a big charisma coming with him. So please enjoy us next week. It will be a very interesting conversation from there. And as we finished and as we started with Mr. Van Halen, let's finish with Mr. Van Halen. Mr. Sharp, thank you very much, guys. Have a super week. So guys, we shall see you next week. Thank you very much for attending. This has been Jump Advisory Group, and this is Kickstart Your Business. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Cheers, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye.